It is approaching 7 o'clock on the Saturday before Christmas, and we have had a very, very, very busy day in the shop. I am exhausted, so is Laura, but the content drive never sleeps. So today, we've got a little video for you. It is about the books that we have gifted most in our lives, and we've asked some folks around online, friends of ours, about the books they've gifted most in their lives as well, because I think this is a great question. I think it reveals a lot about the kind of books that you like. It kind of says, like, this is a book that is broadly applicable to most of my friends and loved ones, and ones that will inspire them, and something that kind of like gives you a kernel of the kind of person you are and the kind of books you like. So without much further ado, you called me neatening our bookshelves. I want to talk to you about 2, maybe 3 books actually. That's kind of cheating, but it's within the spirit of the question. So books that I've gifted more than any other book. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is Piranesi. What makes this book so amazing? Well, first of all, it's written by my favourite author. So to spread the word of Susanna Clarke is something that I want to do. But Piranesi, I think, is just way more accessible than Jonathan Strange is, because some people don't get on with the prose style in Jonathan Strange and don't get on with the storytelling and how long it is. Whereas Piranesi is just something completely different, something that I can't think of a single book that's like it. You know, it's written from the perspective of someone who is trying to work out why they are in this strange, weird in-between world that has lots of pillars and statues, and there's a tide which swells up at random points, and they don't know why they're there or whether that is all there is, and they don't know what the place is. They're trying to recover their memories, and the way the storytelling embraces that conceit is just so wonderful. So whenever I see this book in a charity shop, I always buy it so I can give it to someone. So I think I've got like 3 copies at home. So Piranesi is my number 1 choice. What is the book you've gifted most in your life?
Probably Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. It's this one here. It's about a plague. It's a plague dystopia. And I first read it years ago. And then I reread it during COVID, which was a mistake. But I would recommend everyone to read it because it's just so beautifully done. You'd expect it to be depressing, but it's not depressing in the slightest. It's gorgeous. Everything that Emily St. John Mandel writes is gorgeous. Sea of Tranquility is gorgeous. The Glass Hotel is gorgeous. And it's just something that I return to over and over and again, and that I recommend all the time. I've gifted it many times. I recommend it to customers all the time as well. It focuses on what is called the Georgia flu, and it starts before the breakout of the Georgia flu at a theatre performance of one of Shakespeare's plays, where the actor playing the main role dies on stage. That's not a spoiler because it happens in, the first chapter. From the get-go, the writing just grabs you and does not let you go. It is so beautifully done, and you just feel so fully taken along for the ride.
Why is it that Station 11 in particular is the book you keep coming back to as a gift for people?
Because it touches a lot of those bases. It's beautifully written, it's dystopian, it's grounded in reality. It is science fiction in a way. So for me, a lot of my friends love science fiction. A lot of my friends love dystopias. A lot of my friends love beautiful writing. I can't think of anything better to gift, especially because it's one that I love so intensely. I want to share with them something that I've really enjoyed and that I think they will enjoy on a personal level because I know them.
The lovely people over at Hardy's Book asked me what book have I gifted the most? And by far that would be The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. If the person hasn't read any fantasy, this is a gateway drug into the fantasy genre, and I think this is a really good place to start. I think it's incredibly addictive. It's also super easy to read, and some people do get put off by the page count, but once they get into it, it's very accessible and fast-paced and good fun. So by far the book that I've gifted the most for non-fantasy readers. If they have already read a ton of fantasy, I do try and suit it to the reader. However, the one that still has not steered me wrong is the Ember Blade. So if they're a fantasy reader, this is a modern day classic fantasy feeling book that is very akin to Lord of the Rings, has really fun characters, really good dynamics, a big quest fantasy. It has beautiful writing and by far gets the most amount of "I enjoyed this" from people who I've recommended it to. Or a Nessie bookmark, because look how adorable that is. You can cut that bit out if you want. You can cut all of it out if you really want. Just don't include it.
Hello, Gabby.
Hello.
Gabby is a friend of the shop, and you want to tell us about a book that you keep giving to people.
Yeah, it was one of my favourite books growing up as a kid. It's called A Friend is Someone Who Likes You by Joan Walsh Angland. First published in 1958, and it's just about friendship, and it's very cute because it's about having friends, having few friends, having lots of friends, or even making friends with things like a tree or a brook, or how the wind can be a friend because it makes the leaves dance around you, and it's just very sweet.
Coming at you from rainy England, but Ross and Laura have kindly asked me to tell you what book I gift the most. Trouble is, not many people around me read, so I'm going to change it and tell you what book I recommend and scream about the most and bug people online to read, including my mother. And to start that off with, I'm going to recommend John Gwynne. Why? Because I've managed to get my non-reader mother into John Gwynne, right? She loves Vikings. Of course she'd like John Gwynne, right? She's currently on Shadow of the Gods, which I do recommend you start there with John Gwynne. But Faithful of the Fallen, top tier. Absolutely top tier. Next I am going to recommend is going to be the Word of the Many. Why? Because it's slaps, man. It's I don't know how to explain it. Just go read it. It's so good. Prepare for your mind to be blown. And it would not be me, and I think Laura would disown our friendship if I did not mention Robin Hobb. Realm of the Elderlings, mainly Fit Stories, because while I do enjoy the others, Fit Stories, top tier. Those are the three books I recommend, and I scream at people to continue to read. And if you don't like those books, fine. Just know that you're chipping away at my heart every single time. There you go.
My number 2 choice, we have to go over to sci-fi, and that is Exhalation by Ted Chiang. Another Picador book, by the way. Interesting, Picador. They have good choice, good taste. Well done, Picador. Exhalation is a series of short stories. It is the second series of short stories by Ted Chiang. The first one being Stories of Your Life and Others. And then about 15 years later, we got Exhalation. And Exhalation has my favourite science fiction short story in it, which is a time travel short story set in the structure of 1001 Nights. So you have an individual from Baghdad who has met this alchemist who has created these hoops that allow you to travel 10 years back in time, and it then sets up a series of stories with morals, and that's all inside a short story as well. It has so many more amazing short stories in there, to the point where I think that I keep giving this book away because there's something for everyone inside it. I mean, first of all, like, the stories are so inventive, and you're just in awe that anyone could come up with something like that. But then everyone will come out of this collection with a different favourite. So Exhalation is a brilliant gift to people, especially people who are just kind of like trying to work out if they like sci-fi or whether they just kind of like books that are quite heady. I mean, it's quite cerebral, but it is also impeccably well told.
Hi Ross and Laura, you guys asked me what was the book that I have gifted the most over my lifetime. Well, got a bit of a problem there in that I don't really gift books very often. The kind of books that I read, science fiction and fantasy, are the kind of books that most of my friends are not that interested in. However, there is one caveat to this. So in 2022, I read the entire Dresden Files series. I read them back to back. There's like 17 books if you include like side stories and novellas and all this sort of jazz. And it was basically all I talked about for that entire year. And my close friend group, we have a Christmas drinks. One year I surprised them all with book 1 in the Dresden Files. I made them all unwrap it simultaneously, and I laughed a lot, and I thought it was very funny. And then actually 2 of them read those books and genuinely really enjoyed them. I think that says a lot about the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, and how wide the appeal is, and also how accessible those books are. Urban fantasy allows people to get more into it easily. Like, a lot more people are interested in stuff like Buffy the Vampire Slayer than Lord of the Rings. Well, maybe that isn't true. Maybe I just like Buffy the Vampire Slayer more than Lord of the Rings. I think that it's a great book to gift because most people would enjoy it. And I will be looking to urban fantasy stuff for my future recommendations, I think, mostly. So Jade City is going to be winging its way out to a ton of friends, I'm sure. Have a good one.
Hi, Ross and Laura. You asked, what's the book I've gifted the most? It's this one here, Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen Donaldson. Stephen R. Donaldson in the US. It's the first book in the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. It was actually just called the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, because there wasn't a second at the time. Now, this book was written in 1977, and it's a book I've read 5 or 6 times. I read it again this year and recorded a podcast about it with a friend of mine who'd not read any of them and who doesn't read fantasy. And it's probably the deepest and richest fantasy world that I've encountered in a book. And as I get older and I read it again, I read more about philosophy and religion, and I come to understand life a bit better just through experience. I get more and more out of it. And it's to do with the idea that the despair that we can all feel in life can be externalized and defeated. And the main character in the book is horrible. He's an anti-hero. He's a quintessential anti-hero, and he does despicable things. And I think that's partly why I don't think any single person to whom I've gifted this book has actually read it. So the foe in the book, the baddie, is called Lord Fowl, hence the title, Lord Fowl's Bane. And of course, Lord Fowl's Bane is Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. Why is he called the Unbeliever? Well, because when he finds himself in the fantasy land after having had an accident, and he wakes up in this fantasy land, and he refuses point blank to believe in any of it, which that kind of, for him, feels like a justification for some of the despicable things that he does. If you can get past that, it's worth it. That's the book I've gifted the most. Maybe now I'll stop gifting that one and start gifting A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving, which is the second most gifted book, because it's much more wholesome.
I have one more book, and for that we have to go over to non-fiction. Come with me, Laura. This is specifically a book for writers, and whereas I would say it is not, I don't think it's the best book for writers, but I do think it is the most broadly applicable one, and that one is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I think this is essential reading for people who want to become a writer, specifically if they want to make their life about writing. So not only does it give you some practical advice about writing books, it also gives you practical advice about having a book published and the psychology behind being a writer and the pitfalls that you might fall into if you make it your whole being. So it's an incredibly insightful book. It is just full of brilliant advice, and also Anne Lamott is fantastic, and we love her wit, we love her critique, and we love her social media posts. I'm a big fan of Anna Mott. Anyway, those are my 3 book recommendations that I give all the time. I always have a spare copy of these books at home to give away.
And rounding off the video, we have a few choices that came from Instagram. So first of all, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer came from Neo Literary, who has bought that one a number of times. Then also we have Finding God in the Waves by Mike McHargue. It's a book that I've gifted to, actually. This is written by a friend of mine and of Steve, who recommended it, given it loads of times, and yes, it's great for those in the religious margins. Also, Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, which is the first of the Witcher books. Thank you, Booked, Line and Thinker, for telling us about that gift that you've given. Then we go on to Bings, who has 2 choices for us. So she has given The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, and finally out in audiobook in the UK at long last. And the second one of her recommendations was A Darker Shade of Magic, or at least the first book of the 2. She'd accidentally said A Gathering of Shadows, but she told me to correct it, so that's all good. And lastly, we have from Rufus Custard, The Book Thief, which we've heard lots of good things about. So all these recommendations that came through on Instagram. And one last contribution.
Jade City.